Hello and welcome to Missouri Legislative Update. This month we bring you our show from the second floor of the Missouri State Capitol. In today's show, we continue to highlight the work being done by several of the General Assembly's interim committees. I'm Jonathan Lorenz reporting for the Missouri House of Representatives.
And reporting for the Missouri Senate, I'm Jennifer Yapel. Fall is well underway, and throughout Missouri, those working in our state's #1 industry are busy harvesting their crops. Lawmakers in the Missouri General Assembly this year worked to ensure that our farmers and ranchers were able to continue their work and pass down their traditions for generations to come. The legislature passed several encompassing agriculture bills that contained many provisions relating to our state's #1 industry. House Bill 542 and Senate Bill 9 both create University of Missouri Extension districts in order to help counties increase efficiencies and reduce costs. These bills also strengthen the Missouri Livestock Disease Control and Eradication Law. Senator Brian Munzlinger of Williamstown handled the House bill in the Senate.
Violations of the Missouri Livestock Disease Control, that was something that was brought to us by the Department of Agriculture Director when some new federal regulations went into place, and this is aimed to help save money for our agriculture livestock producers.
House Bill 542 also expands the definition of eggs that are intended for us to eat, and the legislation allows for the creation of urban agriculture zones, or UAZs, turning once blighted areas of our state's communities to productive agriculture zones for growers, vendors, and processors. This provision was found in legislation originally filed by Senator Jason Holzman of Kansas City.
So I just appreciate it, and giving us urban Democrats a reason to cheer the agriculture omnibus bill is a great thing. Thank you.
Democrat or Republican or independent, we all like to eat.
We all like to eat. Very true. Thank you.
Another agriculture bill addressed a potential statewide problem if federal lawmakers were to pass a measure limiting the work of youth on family farms. Senate Bill 16, sponsored by Senator Munzlinger, exempts farm work performed by children under the age of 16 from certain prohibited hazardous jobs. With the passage of the bill and its signage into law, these young Missourians are only allowed to work on their families or other family farms as long as they have the permission of their parents.
In my opinion, allows the farms to continue what we've been doing, and that's raising our kids with the work ethic and giving them responsibility.
House Joint Resolutions 11 and 7, carried through the House by Representative Bill Reibold of Neosho, allows voters to decide at the polls upon a constitutional amendment that would affirm the right of farmers and ranchers to engage in farming and ranching practices in the Show Me State.
It's about the family farm. It's about preserving for generations what we've grown to love in Missouri.
Agriculture remains to be one of the most debated issues in the legislature, and we'll show you how lawmakers continue to work on behalf of this important industry during the 2014 session. Members of the Senate and House have been busy during the interim discussing and holding several hearings regarding Medicaid expansion and reform in Missouri. Senate Communications correspondent Brad Bayshore has details on the latest hearings held at the state capitol.
We do have overflow next door.
The Senate Interim Committee on Medicaid Transformation and Reform recently held the last of a series of public meetings regarding health care in Missouri. Earlier hearings focused on the need and orientation of Medicaid in Missouri, how providers supply Medicaid services in the state, and testimony from professionals who have reformed Medicaid programs in other states. Committee Chairman Senator Gary Romine of Farmington discussed the goal of the committee's final meeting and what will happen next.
Today will be the demand side. And so that we will finish with that, and then next month we'll come back together to take all this data we've collected and start formulating the results and a recommendation.
During the hearing, Senator Joseph Kevney of St. Louis questioned a healthcare professional about competitiveness in the medical field in regard to patient access.
Do you feel that we've taken the competitive nature out of human medicine? Do doctors actually get out and just say, you know, I've seen enough patients for today, time to go home?
The Senate Interim Committee is required to share its findings and recommendations to the General Assembly by December 15, 2013. The House Interim Committee on Medicaid Transformation also met recently to hear testimony on expansion and reform. At the beginning of the meeting, Committee Chairman Representative Jay Barnes of Jefferson City told the panel and guests the hearing would focus on waivers, a mechanism provided by the government that helps cover the cost of health insurance premiums for those who meet certain criteria.
And I think the vast majority of our colleagues don't know much about them at all. And so what I want to try to do is create a panel of experts on waivers up here, so as we go into session, we know what we're talking about.
During the meeting, Representative Kimberly Gardner of St. Louis advocated for improved access to Medicaid and discussed how sharing the risk is the goal of the new health insurance marketplace.
And with that risk pool, to be successful, we would like to have a lot of healthy individuals as well as some that have some illnesses. Is that correct? To spread the risk?
Right now, the state of Missouri has not set up a health care exchange, leaving some citizens to rely on the federal marketplace for access to health insurance. The House Interim Committee on Medicaid Transformation plans to hold more meetings before the end of the year and to share its findings with the General Assembly before the start of the 2014 legislative session. Reporting for the Missouri Senate, I'm Brad Bayshore.
Progress continues toward rewriting Missouri's criminal code. Senate Communications Correspondent Dean Morgan has an update.
Senator Bob Dixon of Springfield chairs the Senate Judiciary and Civil and Criminal Jurisprudence Committee. He says lawmakers did not have enough time to get to the criminal code during the regular legislative session, but they had been discussing it during the interim.
A clear, concise, and understandable criminal code contributes to a strong, effective criminal justice system that protects liberty and promotes a free society.
Senate Minority Floor Leader Jolie Justice of Kansas City also serves on the panel. She says essentially the plan is to take up next year where they left off on rewriting the Missouri Criminal Code this year.
We will take all of the recommendations that were made on the House side and then also some recommendations that came through our committee process in the Senate. We will add those changes and we'll start at that point as our document moving forward in January of 2014.
Last year, both Senators Dixon and Justice served on the Joint Interim Committee on the Missouri Criminal Code, which helped lead to the creation of Senate Bill 253, this year's version of rewriting the criminal code. The Senate Judiciary and Civil and Criminal Jurisprudence Committee spent a great deal of time holding hearings on the measure during this year's regular legislative session. Reporting for the Missouri Senate, I'm Dean Morgan.
One of the state capitol's key attractions is Thomas Hart Benton's mural, A Social History of Missouri. In this next story, we meet an individual who played an interesting role in the creation of the mural.
The baby is really prettier.
For Jefferson City resident Harold Brown, Thomas Hart Benton's mural, A Social History of Missouri, holds a special meaning.
Actually, it's part of me. Since my father's in here and I'm in here, it's just part of me.
At the age of 1, Brown served as one of Benton's models for the mural. In the mural, Brown's likeness is depicted as an infant having his diaper changed. Brown believes he is one of the last living models. Brown's father also served as one of Benton's models. He is depicted as the foreman of the jury. For the 78-year-old Brown, every visit to the mural is an emotional experience.
I've probably been here maybe 100 times or more, and every time I come in here I have the same reflection that it's such an emotional thing to see all these living people, which most of them were living people at the time, just as if they're right here alive today.
Benton's mural is part of the House Lounge and is open to the public. We would like to take this opportunity to update you on the Hall of Famous Missourians voting campaign. As of October 31st, the voting period has ended. During the open voting period, more than 30,000 votes were cast by Missourians. Following the voting period, Speaker Tim Jones will now begin the process of raising funds for the new bronze busts. The newest members of the Hall of Famous Missourians will be announced during the 2014 legislative session. After the break, lawmakers take a look at several hot-button education issues. That and more when we return on Missouri Legislative Update.
A boy born in Joplin, Missouri was fascinated by anything with wheels and a motor. The odds of him going on to fascinate millions with his talent? 1 in 260,000. The odds of this born racer having 157 career top 10 finishes in NASCAR? 1 in 125 billion. The odds of him winning both the Daytona 500 and the Brickyard 400 in the same year? 1 in 195 million. The odds of a child being diagnosed with autism? 1 in 88. I'm NASCAR driver Jamie McMurray, and my niece has autism. Learn more at autismspeaks.org/signs.
Welcome back. Members of the Joint Committee on Education met in the beginning of October in Jefferson City to discuss Missouri's current student transfer laws for both sending and receiving school districts. Senate Communications correspondent Brad Bayshore has more on this latest education issue.
We want to be proactive on an issue that is paramount on the education for a large number of Missouri young people.
Representative Mike Lair of Chillicothe outlined the goal of the student transfer hearing held by the Joint Committee on Education during a recent meeting in the state capitol. The panel heard from members of the Missouri Department of Elementary and Secondary Education about issues facing several school districts in the St. Louis area, all of which are acting as receiving schools for students from the Normandy School District. Senator Jamila Nasheed of St. Louis said a current loophole in the law is creating a financial burden and affecting thousands of students.
We have children who was once in private schools that are now leaving the private schools and going into the Normandy school district so that they can go outside of the district. And then you have individuals that are wanting to move in Normandy. They want to move into the Normandy school district so that their children can get a better education by going to a school adjacent to the Normandy school district.
Some of the students are also going to schools in St. Charles County. Senator Scott Roop of Wentzville, who represents a portion of that county in the Senate, said DESE plans to request $6.8 million from the state so the Normandy School District can reimburse other districts taking in their former students. This reimbursement stems from a state law that passed 20 years ago.
Walk me through the rationale for that, because I believe that the law was passed in '93 is to be a deterrent, to not let your school district ever fall into this type of situation, and it didn't seem to have worked. So now the opportunity to disband the district or dissolve the district or send it out because they're going to be financially insolvent is real. And if we lessen that burden by changing the tuition, does that take away any type of incentive for them to reform?
Representative Janice Monticello of St. Louis said adding more charter schools to help with the current situation could create more long-term problems for students in the St. Louis and Kansas City areas because, on average, charter schools in Missouri and nationwide are performing worse than the schools they are supposed to be replacing. She also called for more interaction with local school districts and the state education department.
They deserve more than being passed off to a failed model. And we need to be having serious discussions. And I guess my question is why are we looking to an outside company when we have continually ignored our state educators? We've ignored our teachers. We've ignored our superintendents. The superintendents have come. They've told us what they need. They told us what they feel that needs to happen. We don't ignore. We ignore them. We don't take what they feel is important into account.
Members of the Joint Committee on Education say that legislation will probably be introduced next session to address the current problems with school transfers in the state of Missouri. Reporting for the Missouri Senate, I'm Brad Bayshore.
Just as it had started, the Joint Committee on Education concluded the month of October with a hearing at the state capitol regarding the Department of Education's Educator Evaluation System. Senate Communications correspondent Dean Morgan explains.
The 2012-2013 school year was the pilot year for the Educator Evaluation System, which focuses on the formative development of teachers and leaders by improving the effective practices of instructors in the classroom and providing leadership in schools across the state. More than 100 school districts throughout Missouri pilot tested the system during the past school year. It was developed by the Missouri Department of Elementary and Secondary Education in partnership with educators, school district officials, education organizations, and teacher education programs in Missouri's public colleges and universities. Senator Gary Romine of Farmington says he looks at the evaluation system from a former teacher's standpoint.
But also coming from the business world to get my marketing and business degree, I sat through a couple of semesters of supervisory management skills. You're talking about a one-day session, and this is a tremendous amount of responsibility. Is there any plans or anything in the works to make sure that those that are going into administration have a better understanding of what supervisory personnel management is all about, to make that performance evaluation a little bit more effective?
Representative Benet Mims of Kansas City adds there had been concerns before the evaluation system was adopted that a singular approach may not be best for all school districts. She also points out the system is not about firing teachers, rather it's about working with instructors and making improvements.
Everyone that's left back that's wanting to move forward, are they on board and want to be on board with what the strategies that you have in place, and with their teacher morale, is it turning around?
Committee members say they plan to discuss the educator evaluation system again when lawmakers return to Jefferson City next year. Reporting for the Missouri Senate, I'm Dean Morgan.
After the break, Senate Communications correspondent Dean Morgan sits down with Senator Eric Schmitt of Glendale to discuss tax reform. Stay tuned.
Imagine what you'd see if every child had a book to read. 'Cause every kid across the nation deserves a book to read, and we can make it happen right now. No, I don't know what you've been told, but kids with books learn so much more. So the mission is for us to get a book to each and every child. So let's join hands, book people unite, unearth hidden passion. Have a good time. Seeds of inspiration to motivate some magic. To change the writing on the wall. Writing on the wall. Can make a difference. One book can inspire a child. One book can be the first thing that helps to change a life. People unite.
Read to a child today and spark a lifetime of ambition.
Talking with Senator Eric Schmitt from Glendale. He is the chair of the Jobs, Economic Development, and Local Government Committee, which has heard a lot about taxes. And when we talk about taxes this year especially, the topic was House Bill 253 and the potential for cutting the income tax in Missouri. Let's take a trip back first. What got us to initially Senate Bill 26 and then House Bill 253 this year?
Well, I think for the last couple years, there's been a pretty broad discussion about doing something about our income tax rate, our corporate tax rate, and also what small businesses pay as flow-through entities. If you'll recall, 2 years ago I handled a bill that eliminated over a 5-year period the corporate franchise tax, which was this sort of outdated double tax on assets. And what it did was, if you reached a certain threshold, you didn't pay taxes up to a threshold for those assets other than local property taxes. But once you hit that threshold, you pay taxes on all of it. So it was a real disincentive for companies to expand, to build that next plant, or to buy that inventory in our state. So over a 5-year period, I think in a responsible way, with Senate Bill 11 in 2011, we eliminated that over a 5-year period. I think that got the ball rolling for some more ideas that might be out there to make Missouri more competitive. Some other senators and representatives had bills that would lower the personal income tax rate. I had been working on a bill for the last 3 years that created a business income deduction, which essentially was for every business in the state, no matter how you're organized, the dry cleaner that's organized as an LLC or the mechanic that has that small business as a family business, that they would pay 50% less in taxes to the state than they currently do. It takes a little while in Jefferson City for those ideas to come to the forefront. All of it, I think, that culminated in 2013, and we got together people of like minds and put together some legislation that was broad-based in its nature and something I think that can improve the economic condition of the citizens in our state. If you remember, we talked a lot about how Missouri ranks 47th in GDP growth over the last 10 years as compared to other states. We've lost half of our congressional delegation over the last 70 years. And so you look at the landscape, you note what other states are doing, like Kansas, Oklahoma. A lot of states, particularly to our west, are lowering taxes. Philosophically, you look historically,
Anytime you've had a broad reduction in taxes, whether it was JFK or Ronald Reagan, you've seen economic expansion. And so we look at what's going on around us, we know what's worked historically, and we want to be a part of that.
And you talk about Kansas. This, to some people's thinking, was really the catalyst for this year. But again, as you say, with the corporate franchise tax and others, this was kind of the next logical step.
It was, and I think it's fair to say that I think it added a more of a sense of urgency because, look, the reality is, and I represent suburban St. Louis County. The neighbor to our east is Illinois. No one wants to emulate what Illinois is doing right now on tax policy. They've raised taxes by 66%. But on the western side of the state, that competition is more acute. You can move your business across State Line Road, literally not a river, but a road, and you can save 6 to 7%. For a small businessman who's supporting his family, who wants to maybe go on a vacation or to have more time with his family, that's a lot of money. And that's, to me, what this debate is really all about. I grew up in a very middle-class family in North St. Louis County. My dad worked 7 days a week. He worked in Anheuser-Busch. He worked the night shift. I knew what take-home pay meant for our family and more take-home pay. And that, to me, is what this debate is about. It's about that single mom being able to decide where, maybe have more options for her kid to go to school. It's about the guy working at the mechanic shop who can have more money to decide. I think people inherently, individuals, know better how to spend their money than government does. And to me, that's part of this philosophical debate. But if you look at the real world in real time, what's happening in Kansas, they eliminated that tax altogether. They also lowered their individual income tax rate. And I think for us to remain competitive, it's something we've got to take a look at. But also, if you look at the numbers and the data over time, people who, anytime you've had this broad reduction in tax policy, people have more of their own money to spend in the economy. So for businesses, that means they can hire more people. They can buy more inventory, they can buy more equipment, they can do whatever they choose to do with that money. And for people, they can go on a vacation, or they can build that addition to their house, or they can just spend more time with their family. That's, to me, part of the discussion that we need to have more about how these policies, and tax policy is not the only thing, but it's an important thing about, sort of the economic outlook of a state, but how it can improve the lives of people. And that's what drives me, and I think that's what is driving this discussion.
This year, the original proposal of Senate Bill 26 included essentially an equal increase to the sales tax than what we saw in terms of decrease to the income tax. And there were those who said this can't work, and that was reworked in House Bill 253. How crucial would an increase to a sales tax be to keeping alive a cut to the income tax when lawmakers come back next year?
My own personal opinion about it is you have to look, again, where you have, I think, 70+% of our population within, I think, 50 miles of a border state. We have to be sensitive to the issue of sales taxes. I think the better path forward for us is something that's akin to 253, which is to say that in a responsible way, over a 5 or a 10-year period, we're going to phase in these reductions in tax liability. And oh, by the way, it's based off of new revenue. Part of this discussion, and I thought was interesting, and when the governor was going around the state trying to employ some scare tactics, in my view, of why you wouldn't want to support a tax cut, was saying that you were going to have these massive cuts in all these services. The truth of the matter is that you needed to see $1 billion worth of growth over 10 years before $800 million was returned back to taxpayers. To me, that's a responsible way to move forward. It's phased in over a period of time. It's very different than what other states have. Kansas, for example, it's just a different way of going about doing the same thing. But I think that was a responsible path. I think that's probably what you'll see moving forward in 2014. There's already discussions among people who are very passionate about this issue of what that bill is going to look like. I think it's important for as many people as possible to have input in what that bill does ultimately look like. But at the end of the day, I think that this legislature has made it known that we are very much interested in allowing people to keep more of their own money.
On the other side of that, when you talk about, and this was something else that other senators had talked about during session, after session, before we came back for veto, and that was, again, there are a lot of qualifiers before an actual cut would come to the income tax. The other side of that being, well, Kansas, as you said, did it much more quickly. Is the approach that was taken this year maybe too long? Is 10 years too long to wait for a 0.5% cut in the sales tax or the income tax?
I think that's part of the negotiation that takes place. If you were asking me if I were king of the world for a day, I would like to see a broader reduction in personal income tax rates. I think that having the tax, meaning cutting it in half, for all those small businesses across our state is a good policy, and that was phased in over a 5-year period. I think that's probably a good way to go about addressing some of the concerns of people who weren't maybe as excited about it as I was, and that's part of the legislative process, and that's okay. We live in a system where we have a bicameral legislature, and you have two parties with very different ideas about tax policy. So I think as we work through this, we want to make sure that we can get something done. But again, what's important here is that we have something that's meaningful and that can move the needle, that ultimately lead to greater prosperity.
You talked about the corporate franchise tax, which is in, I think, year or 2 of its reduction. Are we seeing benefits of this particular tax and its cut already?
I think so. You look at some of the retooling that's taking place in a lot of the major manufacturing centers, the auto plants, and some of the other large-scale facilities we have in our state. You've seen a reinvestment in Missouri manufacturing, and I think that's due in no small part to the fact that we've lessened the tax burden to do that. People, when individuals and businesses, when they have more capital to invest, they're going to do it. They're going to make rational economic decisions. I think, you know, these issues are hard, they're difficult, evidenced by the fact that we haven't had a reduction in the income tax rate in 90 years. And so there's a lot of reasons why people will point to why you shouldn't do it. And I think, as we found out over this summer, not a lot of those are based in fact. When you really look at the facts as to how, when you have these broad-based tax reductions, the economy does expand, it does grow. At the federal level, it's a mess because anytime they've ever taken this on, they haven't had the commensurate reductions in spending. We have to do that. We have a balanced budget requirement in the state. So we're going to control spending, but again, returning more of those tax dollars back to people in take-home pay and allowing them to make their own decisions instead of government is something that I fundamentally believe in, and it's evidenced, I think the success of that is evidenced in history and the presidents that have tried it. And you look at the other states that are doing it. Oklahoma is a recent example. They've reduced their income tax rate and they've seen a growth in revenues. And so I think this is something that is smart for us to move forward on. And I think the citizens of the state deserve a new path, a different path. Again, we haven't done this in 100 years, and I think we owe it to them to allow them to keep more of their own money, make more of their own decisions. I think that'll lead to an expansion in our economy.
And we'll see how this plays out next year. That's Senator Eric Schmitt from Glendale, and we thank you for joining us.
And that's our show for this month. If you have any questions about the legislation or the committees, please visit senate.mo.gov. There you'll find the contact information for the 34 members of the Missouri Senate, as well as in Senate's newsroom website. I'm Jennifer Yapel reporting for the Missouri Senate.
And I'm Jonathan Lorenz reporting for the Missouri House of Representatives. If you have any questions regarding anything going on in the House, you can visit our website at house.mo.gov. From all of us with Missouri Legislative Update, thanks for watching, and we hope to see you again next month on Missouri Legislative Update.